Welcome to True Crime Boss. I'm Jarrett Ferrantino, and tonight we brought the expert's expert to rebut the so-called alibi and the details that have recently come out on Brian Kohberger's alibi. Claims of cell phone data locations, claims of hiking in the middle of the night, and stargazing. If you're ready to do some stargazing, stargaze on the expert we brought with us tonight, James Samuel. James is a telecommunications analyst. He's a fighter pilot. He's a defense strategist. Let me tell you this, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to have James Samuel with us, and it is so topical with the alibi that Brian Kohberger has put forth. He is hoping to BS his way into claiming he was nowhere near Moscow and our 4 beautiful victims in Idaho. James, if you could introduce yourself, we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Hey, Jarrett, this is an honor for me to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is James Samuel, Jr., and I am all the things you just said and a lot more, right? I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a veteran, right? I served in the U.S. Air Force proudly, second-generation veteran, graduate of the Air Force Academy, telecommunications engineer by degree and training in the Air Force. And my first assignment, which we'll get into, was actually as a radio frequency spectrum manager at a large U.S. military base and weapons range. And then I went off to pilot training and then flew, the mighty F-15 Eagle, went into civil service, deployed to Afghanistan, led teams over there in combat zone doing geospatial analysis when I was working for the Defense Department. Also deployed to East Africa in Djibouti, and another 6 months there in country, leading a team between, Djibouti and Uganda, traveling around the whole Horn of Africa. Started a company to do geospatial stuff for personal security, and here I am.
Well, James, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. And you're also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, correct?
Yeah, I did my executive training there at the Harvard Kennedy School, right?
Well, your greatest qualification for being on the show is being a father. That's where our resumes, that's the most similar fact of our resume, and I think it parts company there. But which is why we work well together, right?
Amen.
So, James, I wanted to talk really about your background and this alibi. Have you had an opportunity to basically review what's being claimed by Brian Kohberger at this moment as his defense is beginning to clarify the mounting of his defense?
I have, Jared. I've had a chance to read the alibi, what's out in the public space, right? And it's striking on a couple levels for me. It's striking for what it says, and it's striking for what it doesn't say, and it claims. And it's really paradoxical, given my background, to kind of look at what he said and the other mountain of evidence around what I believe happened and what it seems like actually happened, and the two are at complete odds with each other.
Well, tell me, James, first of all, on your initial review, I mean, basically, Kohberger is saying, just to sum up the alibi, he had a habit of driving in the middle of the night because his busy schedule at the college didn't allow for him to hike or walk or get out during the day. He was accustomed to driving around in the middle of the night. So when an alibi is brought upon a prosecution, the first thing I do, James, is I look at the points that we can agree on. I say, what in your alibi is consistent with my theory of the case? And first of all, what jumps out at me is Brian Kohberger doesn't say, I was home asleep in my bed. He says, no, I was in my white 2015 Hyundai Elantra, out and about, ready and able to commit these crimes. Where the difference of opinion occurs is, in fact, his lawyers are now claiming Kohberger was stargazing, driving around, had a habit of hiking, and the cell phone data supports the fact that he was miles away from the Moscow crime scene. But the prosecution has claimed the data supports him coming into Moscow, going offline, then leaving the area, going south, heading back toward his home after the time of the murder. So when you look at that, what's jumping out at you when you take your background and your experience in this field?
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me, Jarrett, is that 2-hour delay, right? That 2-hour absence where there was no ping on a network tower for 2 hours from, I believe the times were 2:47 a.m.
Yes.
until about 4:48 a.m. On the morning of the murder, right? And so at the exact same time that these young, people are being horrifically murdered in their home, in their college campus, house, his cell phone just happens to be off for that exact window of time. So the first thing that jumps out at me as a radio frequency, manager and a telecommunications engineer is, okay, that was not that was a deliberate outage. That was a planned outage because there's so much coverage of spectrum in that area for T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. All the major carriers blanket that area with radio frequency spectrum from the cell tower. So there's really no place you can go in that area where your phone's just going to be out of contact with the network. Right. And for my wife's, one of her special birthdays, we went to the Grand Canyon and I made a cell phone call from the bottom of the Grand Canyon, went to Vegas and then we flew to the Grand Canyon, right? Got in a helicopter, just did the whole thing. And I'm in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I call my mom from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I had cell phone coverage in the bottom of the Grand Canyon on a network, right? A popular one that everybody uses.
Well, and that's the thing, James. So Kohberger was on the AT&T network, the phone net issue that he's believed to have been traveling with that night. And have you had an opportunity to look at AT&T's coverage in that area?
I've looked at AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon coverage in that area, and both on the Idaho side and the Washington State side, it's blanketed. I mean, there are no dead zones, right? There's no place you're going to go on either side of that border where you're not going to have complete cell phone coverage. And think about it, it's a college campus, right? You better believe those cell phone carriers are going to make sure those college students have access to their network and anywhere around there, on both college campus sides of the border, right? So the access to the network was abundantly available. So that phone didn't just, have an outage where he went off into the hills and then he was sort of out of coverage for a while he was out looking at the stars or hiking or whatever. That's not what happened. But that's what I believe the alibi leads you to believe is that, I was out of network range at the time, and he wasn't. So to me, the phone had to have been manually turned off.
And now we're speculating here. So that there's one of two things they could say. And don't let me forget to go back to my second point because I always do that. But my first point would be they're claiming he was so far afield from Moscow that he wasn't pinging off any tower. And they'll say the only place that happens is near this state park somewhere, which means he's in this dark zone. You're saying, well, first of all, that is a far stretch to say because he's not communicating with a tower, he must be in the only dark zone in the region. The second point I was trying to would like to ask you is this: does that necessarily mean is it possible he's in a particular area, he's near the house on King Road, and it's pinging on another tower miles away instead? So I guess it's kind of a multifaceted question there.
The only way that would be possible is if he and his phone were separated, right?
Okay.
I mean, you can leave your phone anywhere you want to and physically go somewhere else. I can take my phone and throw it in the other room here, and I'm still talking to you. My phone's in the other room. And so we can't be deceived to believe that a person and their phone are always joined. They're not. People forget their phones and, when you drive off, leave your phone, whatever. So is it possible that his phone could ping on a different tower than where he physically was? Absolutely, if he left his phone or lost his phone or deliberately placed his phone someplace. So yes, that is possible.
But if he's with his phone, in all likelihood, it's pinging off the tower closest to him and triangulating him to a particular position, right?
Yes, and what's most telling that if so here's a question to ask: how is it possible for your cell phone, Jared, to be on one side of a state line at 2:47 a.m. and then for 2 hours be gone and then end up on the other side of a state line 2 hours later and it not be in your possession?
It's not likely at all. In fact, I think the most telling component to this case is this. He's picked up on a video camera in front of Kate's Cup of Joe the next morning. His phone supports the fact that he's at that exact spot. So I love taking and marrying these couple of different pieces of evidence. You got the video. The video shows that he was in his white Hyundai Elantra in front of Kate's Cup of Joe. And believe it or not, whoops, his cell phone shows he's there, which means that cell phone is on his person. It's working. and it's hitting the towers that are tied to Brian Kohberger and his car at that time. And I often take a piece of evidence like that and say, no, wait a minute, we can't have it both ways. A couple of hours ago during the murder, you're saying the phone had him somewhere else or was in a dead zone. We got a picture of him at this exact spot that supports the phone record. So, I mean, is that useful in kind of tying back to the data the historical data from the early morning hours?
Yeah, that's useful because it's after the murders, right? And it's corroborated by the video, right? And every phone has its own unique ID, right? It's an IMEI number. It's unique to every single phone, your IMEI number. The network knows that number. It's how it knows that that's your phone, right? And that same IMEI number and that same phone ID was picked up before the murders, visiting that house, right, from August to November, 12 times, right? That same phone circled and went around that house 12 times between August and November, right before the murders. And then it was magically off at the time of the murders for 2 hours. And then it showed up back on right after the murders with the car and a picture. I mean, it's pretty clear that that's his phone and he was at that house before the murders, and all the evidence points to during the murder.
And, you know, when the phone's off for 2 hours, that particular evening, after not doing it 12 prior occasions, we call that intent to commit murder, where I come from. He shut that phone off because he didn't want to be tracked during that 2 hours. So really, James, there's no other. So basically what you've reviewed in the affidavit and what's been foreshadowed in the alibi here, you're supportive of what the prosecution has claimed thus far, correct?
Yes. By what the prosecution has claimed, you mean that he did the murder and that he turned his phone off during that time. And there's no likely way, plausible, probable, or believable way that his phone was off while he was stargazing in some remote part of Washington State for those 2 hours. I absolutely believe that. That's nonsensical.
And are you familiar with a credible expert in your industry that would suggest that data, the cell phone data, and the location information gleaned from it is somehow inaccurate and miles off in this particular situation?
Not a credible one. No, I don't believe a credible radio frequency analyst or a credible geospatial analyst or a 6-year-old would put all those things together and come up with a conclusion that it was possible for him to have wandered into his dead zone somewhere, right? And the park that he claimed he was in or around is closed and it's gated.
How about that?
All right. He lists the park because Idaho requires you to list a specific place that you were, right? The law of Idaho says that to have an alibi, it has to have 2 pieces. You have to list a place, and I believe you have to have somebody who has corroborated you, a witness of you at that place that you list in your alibi. He's listed a place. I don't believe he's listed a person that can corroborate him there. And the place that he listed is closed from dusk until 7 a.m. per the website of the state park, on the Snake River. So why would you list the place that's closed at dark?
Well, and he's either then a murderer or a trespasser, right? In a park, so he's choosing the lesser of two evils there. But so you raise a great point. This alibi and the alibi law requires a supportive witness for an alibi and a place other than the murder location. And my position on this is, and my position has been since Kohberger's team first launched the more ambiguous alibi, is he has painted himself into a corner here. The only way he can establish or even attempt to establish this alibi is he has to get on the witness stand. There's not one witness identified by the defense at all. In fact, he was alone driving. They say that. There is no witness that corroborates this alibi. So Kohberger would have to get on the stand. They're going to stretch that witness requirement to suggest that they have an expert witness. His phone is essentially the witness, and they're going to use that expert witness to crowbar this alibi position in. The other thing they're going to try to do is take this alibi and allow them to take liberties in cross-examination of the witnesses that are presented for the prosecution in support of the cell phone data. The problem with that is you could have done that all along and not have wedded yourself to this alibi. I think they stepped out too far. And based on your representation and your understanding and your background in this, there's not a credible expert that's going to support what he's saying. He's painted himself into a corner here. I want our viewers to understand that this is going to come down to a battle of geospatial location data and towers. Explain to me and our viewers how a cell phone and a tower communicate and what you can derive from that communication.
Okay, so first thing I want everyone to know is that your phone has several antennas on it. Every cell phone has about at least four antennas on a modern cell phone, because you need one for the cellular communication, which is a radio communication with the cell tower. You need one for your GPS antenna, so the phone knows where it is to talk to the GPS constellation. You need a Wi-Fi antenna for your Wi-Fi connection, and you have a Bluetooth antenna. And so there's four different antennas on pretty much every modern cell phone. So that's the first thing. Those antennas are emitting and receiving radio frequency spectrums in different parts of the radio frequency spectrum. So in the case of a cell phone tower, that's in the ultra high frequency band, UHF band, somewhere around 900 megahertz and up to like 2.4 gigahertz or so, right? It's pretty impervious to weather, so that's why your cell phone works in the rain and whatnot. Different radio frequency spectrums can get sort of filtered out by rain and cloud, but UHF, it works well in all weather conditions, and it penetrates through deep forest pretty well. So it's a pretty resilient part of the spectrum band, that UHF band. When I flew fighters, I had a UHF radio in the F-15. And then there's also a VHF radio if you're going to talk to the ground troops. Usually the F-16s or A-10s have VHF. Eagle only has UHF radio because it's all air-to-air. But that's the same spectrum that a cell phone works in. And the tower, and this reason it's called a cell tower, is because there are these cells. You could look at like a honeycomb, kind of a pattern on a beehive or overlapping.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so there are these cells, and that's why it's cellular, because there are these cells that sort of hand off the phone as it travels, and the towers have a certain range. Usually the max range is about 20 miles between a cell phone and the tower for the battery strength and the transmission strength of the phone and whatnot. So as long as you have your cell towers within 20 miles of each other, the phone can be handed off, and as the signal strength gets weaker, it heads towards not being able to communicate with that cell tower, which is monitoring the strength of the signal of the phone that it's talking to, then you should be in range of the next tower, right? And in the next tower, there's a handoff that's done, and then your spectrum is passed over to the next tower. Now that tower has got you, and it's communicating. It's all seamlessly done to the user. You don't know that you're being handed off from tower to tower to tower as you're driving or whatever.
And when that communication is happening, James, there is a documentation also, like a recording of what phones have hit that tower, and then there's a communication back to the phone, correct?
Yes, that's correct. The carriers know which phones are on which tower at what time, and the phone, they have to be handed off between the towers, and so it's all done it's automatically done, but there is a record of that.
And so let me ask you this. And so understanding a little bit more about what that technology, and thanks for that explanation because it clarified some things. Is it possible, and I hope this isn't true as a lawyer, as what I try to be as ethical of a lawyer as possible, but is it possible somebody for the defense went out and found some dead zones and found a reason that, and we're just speculating here, to say that Kohberger was in those dead zones during the time?
Well, again, that would be a pretty silly thing to do, because one, you'd have to go find a dead zone. So can you imagine somebody going out instead of saying, "Can you hear me now?" They're trying to find where does my phone not work?
Right.
Good luck in the 21st century of 5G and ultra wide band. Good luck finding dead zones, especially around college campuses. Good luck with that. That would take you longer than this trial has already been. Just find that dead zone, number one. The second thing you have to do is find a way to stay in that dead zone for 2 hours, right? You'd have to stand in one very precise spot, which probably wouldn't work. Just,
or hike very slowly, as the defense is claiming he was hiking or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's farcical, it's nonsensical to find a dead zone and to stay in it or claim that he was driving. Now, if you're driving, even a phone that has maybe intermittent coverage with a cell tower, like your phone, you're getting a weak signal, hey, it's going in and out. You'll get like every fifth word, it'll start the communication start breaking down, but there's still contact with the tower. And even if the signal is too weak for you to speak on or hear, it's still strong enough for the tower to know you're there. And that's a great point. Even if you sound like you're in a dead zone, you may not be in a dead zone, you're saying. Yeah, you may be in a dead zone from hearing and talking, but you're not in a dead zone from the tower knowing that you're on the frequency.
Well, I gotta say, I am intrigued by this case, and now then there's all these subparts of this case: the Elantra subpart, the DNA subpart. Now we have this alibi subpart, and we're going down this cell phone rabbit hole. They have telegraphed their position. I am eagerly anticipating how their expert's going to come in and basically rebut what you just said, James. And no credible person is really in a position to do that. I'm confounded by the position they're taking, and I'm curious as to why they're even taking it. But that's more of a legal issue. But I really appreciate you sharing your technological background with us and your expertise. And as I said, I mean, you've testified before Congress, you've been in DC, you've done all this work. To have joined us is a great honor. And I trust that we're going to continue to dive into Kohberger's defense's position and attack or try to understand whatever expert they pull out and whatever his ultimate conclusions are going to be, because they've identified someone. I want to share it with you and have you evaluate and comment on that report.
Thank you, Jared. I would love to hear what this expert's going to say, because again, I have an engineering degree from the Air Force Academy, and that wasn't easy to get. I was then trained by the Air Force as a telecommunications engineer, and my very first assignment in the Air Force was a lieutenant who was in charge of the Nellis Range Complex's radio frequency spectrum, allocations, deconfliction, interference. And that range has every asset, top secret, all kinds of different foreign aircraft come there from our NATO allies and countries to train there, do red flags, and whatnot, exercises. There's all kinds of jamming that happens on that range, from big jamming platforms like B-52 to B-1, other things, EA-6B prowlers in the Navy. So it's a very complex spectrum environment on that Nellis Range complex. And as a second lieutenant, I had a team of people, and that was my job as an engineer, is to manage all that spectrum for the U.S. Air Force and for all of our NATO allies. And I had the job for 3 years. So I know a little bit about spectrum management.
Just a bit.
I read it. So I read about it somewhere, right? Right. But I really am curious to know how. And I've engineered radio networks, land mobile radio networks and trunking networks and microwave shots and troposcatter and all these different types of communications environments in the military. And I'm really curious to see how the alibi that they've laid out is even remotely possible, and not laughable. I'd love to see that.
James, in your current role as an entrepreneur and the company you're associated with now, have you addressed some of the things that we've talked about here today?
Yeah, Jared, I have. And it's really interesting because, talked about my military background and whatnot as a telecommunications engineer, but I've taken all of that military experience and I've applied it to creating technologies that help keep people safe, that's cell phone based, that's location based. And so that's another aspect of this case that's really striking for me. My technology is called Angel Tech, right? And it's Angel with a J, and it's in the App Store and the Google Play Store. And this is a patented technology. We just received our patent about a year ago, because what it does is it allows your family to know your location and to see what's happening to you in real time through a live stream. And then the other part of it that's striking compared to this case, sort of juxtaposed with this case, is we've created the technology of Angel Tech such that if anything happens to you or your phone, all of that geospatial data, the location data, the video is all packaged and kept off the phone and in the cloud so that your family still has access to that record of your whereabouts, knowing that, phones can be either lost, misplaced, turned off, stolen. We've made sure that our technology captures and records and stores your location, your family's location, and the video so that it's still accessible. So when I see this Kohberger case and see how it appears that he's tried to, manipulate his phone, either turn it off or find a dead zone or some other kind of scheme to show, his innocence, it doesn't make any sense on a whole other level for me, because I've created technology that also works around that attempted alibi on his part.
Well, that's, I represented, as you know, James, I represented the family of Brittany Drexel, and so much of finding Brittany's body and what happened to Brittany was cell phone technology. Boy, if angel technology was around then, I don't think her family would have had to wait 13 years for justice. And I congratulate you on the company, and I know you're doing very well with it. And congratulations on the patents. I know that's not an easy process either. But that only supports why I think our listeners should be listening to your opinion that this possible alibi is junk science. So we're going to continue to monitor it. I appreciate your assessment of this position so far. Thank you so much, James, for being with us. We're going to continue to call upon us. You're our expert in a great many fields, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.